All right, today we're going to be making what's called a Skjold Harbor Hood. It was found in Norway near Skjold Harbor. It's an 11th century Viking age find. It was found as part of a whole outfit actually, with an undertunic and an overtunic, the hood, some pants, leg wrappings, shoes, and a braided belt. We're just making the hood today, and my cat is going to help because she's very good like that. It's a pretty simple project. It takes 3 pieces. You want, let me just move the cat. Here's me kitty. 2 13-inch squares. I have those here. And then 1 long piece that is 13 inches by 52 inches. And if you don't have a piece that long, what you can do is take 2 like 26.5-inch pieces and combine those. I did that over here with this one. I just sewed together the 2 shorter pieces and put the seam right at the top and just ironed it flat. Using a couple of pieces to make a bigger piece of cloth is called piecing, and it's totally medieval. So that is a good option. So what we're going to do is just sew together the 3 pieces, and then you've got a hood. So the first step is we're going to take our big rectangle and we're going to put a pin right about halfway, and this will be helpful later. And then what you want to do after that is pin your squares to the rectangle. Now I'm just using a piece of flannel I had, and you can see it's the same on both sides. But if you have a fabric that isn't the same on both sides, like this ridiculous fabric with chicks on it, you want to make sure that you are putting the right sides together, and the right side is the side that you want to show later. So by putting right sides of the fabric together, it means that your seam, which will be here, is on the inside, and then when you open it up later you won't see it, you'll just see the side of the fabric you wanted to see. So that's a thing to keep in mind while you're pinning. So I'm going to get started on that. So the first square we're going to put on is going to be right at the bottom of this rectangle piece. As I said, it doesn't matter for me which side I'm putting together because my fabric is a side on both. But if we were going to use this ridiculous chick fabric, you would lay out your rectangle, ridiculous chicks facing you. Then you would take one of the squares and you would just make sure that these sides that look the same, the right sides, were facing each other, just like that. And you would pin it like that. So because these are going to get sewn into a longer seam later, what you want to do is have a 1/2 inch at the top of this edge that I'm pinning right now that you were not going to sew. So I'm just going to put my pins along the edge. And then at about a 1/2 inch from the top, just because this is a little easier for me, I'm going to put 2 pins to remind myself not to sew past that. All right. So you can do this by machine or you can do it by hand, whatever is easier for you, or if you have access to a sewing machine and somebody to work on it with. I'm going to show you just how to do the hand sewing part. So part of sewing is knowing that there is a seam allowance on a lot of things. Here I've included a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So there's different ways that you can mark the seam allowance for yourself. Some people mark it right on the fabric. You can use a pen or tailor's chalk or a marking pen for that. Another way to do it is that sometimes you can just use your thumb. So I have a little measuring board here, and this is my thumb. And so a 1/2 inch for me is just about the length of my thumbnail. So while I'm holding the fabric, if I just sew on this side of my thumbnail, I'm always leaving about a 1/2 inch of space all the way along. You don't want to go too close to the edge because some fabric can unravel and then it will undo all of your hard work. So I have already prepared a piece of thread with a knot at the bottom. The next time I need one, I will show you how to make a knot in case you do not know. I like to start sewing by letting the knot get caught and then doing just a couple of anchor stitches, which are just a couple of small stitches in the same place. So I'm just going to do that. And then for this project, because this seam isn't going to take a lot of strain, you could do a running stitch, which is a pretty quick stitch. But you want to do what's called a back stitch every once in a while, just to make sure that it's nice and locked in place. I'm using a very different color of thread from my fabric because I want you to be able to see. You don't have to do that. You can use a thread that matches your fabric. So I'm just doing a couple of running stitches at a time on my needle. And then I'm doing one back stitch. And I will show you why in a second. So if I did, trying to keep my running stitches pretty small, just because it does a better job of holding your garment together. So here's all those running stitches, and if I pull the thread through, if they were all running stitches, it could do this, and it would get all shrunken up like that. But if you put a back stitch in, it acts to kind of lock it, and then that doesn't happen. You can tug on it and it just stays. So to do that, we'll just do another couple of running stitches. So you got your running stitches, and you're just going to go backwards towards that last stitch you did and come up right where you just were. And that's it. And that should do a good job keeping all your stitches nice and even in place. So I'm just going to do that for the rest of this. And I'm going to stop where my 2 pins are, and then we'll take a look at the other side and see how we're doing. All right, so that first piece is all sewn on, just like that. So the next piece is just going to go on the other side of the rectangle, right across from the one you just did. And if you fold back the one you just did, you'll see that seam is nice and hidden. So we're going to pin the next square, just like we did the first one. If I can find my pins. There we go. So we just pin this all into place. And just like I did with the first one, I'm going to put a couple of pins just about a 1/2 inch from the end so that I don't sew over that. This will all make sense later, honest. All right. And this time I'm going to show you how I at least make a knot. There's about 1 million ways to make a knot. When I'm pulling thread to do hand sewing with, I choose thread that is not longer than my arm, because otherwise when you have to pull a stitch, you have to pull your arm way back out of the way. So to make a knot, I'm just going to take the thread, wind it around my finger, which gives you a little loop with this end, and then I'm going to take the end and part of the loop, and I'm just going to roll my thumb down my finger, and when you tighten the loop, you should have a number of wraps around it now. It should make a nice big knot for you. So I'm going to start this one the same way I started the last one. Get that knot stuck in there. Put a couple of stitches in the same spot. And then I'm going to do my running stitch with a couple of back stitches here and there, just to kind of lock it into place, just like we did on the last one. And when I get to the end, I do another couple of anchor stitches again, and you can do a knot after that if you want to, just to make sure it all stays together. You don't have to. So if you want to do that too, I will meet you at the end of this piece. All right, so that's both of the side pieces put on. This is the right side, so you're not seeing the seams. So now we're going to do the long back seam of the hood. So we're going to go back. You might remember we put a pin in about halfway. So I'm going to take the side with the pin. That'll be my back. And we're going to pin this whole edge, which includes the rectangle and also the square we sewed on there. This little bit where they join and you left that little space, that can be a little tricky. So what we're going to do to pin this is we're going to start from both ends. So I'm going to put some pins up here at the top for a while. Just another couple in here. All right, now I'm like a hand's breadth from that seam. Now I'm going to go down to the bottom and I'm going to start working my way up from the bottom. So I'm holding half that rectangle, and now the part I'm pinning is that square we sewed on. So I'm just going to pin till we're pretty close to that seam in the middle and see where we're at, which is looking pretty good, not too wrinkly. So I'm gonna put a pin here. Then I'm gonna take a look at how this is. All right, so you see both sides of the seam there. So I'm just gonna fold this down. We can see the seam now. I'm folding one side down. I'm going to put a pin right over that just to hold it all in place, and then that should be nice and even when we stitch over it. So I'm going to start way down here at the bottom and head for the top, and once again gonna make myself a nice needle and thread. I'm using a thread that's made for hand sewing, so it's pretty strong, but it really doesn't matter what you use. Whatever you have is fine. This is a long seam. You're gonna have to, you know, tie off the thread you're using because you're gonna run out and have to start a new one, and that is okay. When you're working, try not to get too close to the end of your thread. You always want to have enough space left over to make a couple of anchor stitches and make a knot if you want to, without, you know, having like this much left so that you can't do anything. Thread's cheap, so don't be afraid to use it. So we're just going to do this whole seam. Look at that. All done. And that means we're going to move to the front. So just like on all the other parts, we're still putting right side to right side. And this time, we're going to start from the bottom edge of the other side of the rectangle and the other side of the square you sewed. So you can kind of start to see the shape of the hood a little bit. That seam you just sewed is the back. So this other side is the front. Just in case you're a little lost, there's that first square. Here's that back seam we just sewed. So this other edge of the square, this free point is getting attached to the bottom of the rectangle. I hope that makes sense. So this is going to be the area that kind of makes the head hole, and this will be right under your chin. So we're going to start pinning from the bottom. Let me just get a pin in here. And we're just going to pin right up to the top. And here we've got that join from the other side. So I'm going to put a pin here right before our seam. And where that seam stops is where this other side is. See, that's that last stitch we did on that section. So we're going to want to attach it to the top. In this case, I'm just going to fold this piece we're working on towards itself so I can see where that seam is. I'm going to put another pin that's like practically on top of the one we just put, but it catches all those layers just like that. Okay. All right. Pull out the thread, thread the needle, make a knot, and sew that edge. After that, all we have to do is finish the edges. And how much of that you have to do depends mostly on what kind of fabric you're using and what kind of look you want it to have. I keep flipping the fabric over. It's because I like to be able to put my thumb on the open edge so that I can sew next to it. Obviously, if you're left-handed, you're going to do this the opposite way, whatever works for you. So, get my knot caught up, get those anchor stitches in. And then, just like the other sides. Okay, so I'm almost up at the top where that join is on this side. So I'm sewing from the other side, but I'm just going to make sure that I have all the layers where I want them to be. They're still pinned down. Put my finger here to make sure they stay flat. I'm just going to sew to above my pins. Alright, I'm above where the pins are, so I'm just gonna do those anchor stitches again, if I can get this knot out. There we go. Do a couple of stitches in one place to hold it all together. And then pry that off. And that is all set. Okay, so this is the front. This is the hole for your head. This is the front of the hood. This is the side of the hood. You can see that your squares you did, one is on the front, one is on the back. That all looks very nice. So what is left to do on this one is you want to turn over the edge by your face, and we want to just do a hem along the bottom edge to turn it up. You can pin that. If you're doing it by machine, you could do a rolled hem instead. So what I'm going to do is start with one of the points, this point. I believe this is the back. And all I'm going to do to hem this, you could do a whip stitch, you could do a running stitch. Either one would be totally fine. I think I will just do a running stitch along here. So let me get that started. So if you were using the same color thread, you wouldn't see the stitches. There's pretty good evidence to believe the Vikings chose different color thread. And they would use even the stitching along hems or seams as added decoration. So that is an option for you too. All right, so we're at the corner. We just want to make sure that this is our seam, we're turning that over. So all the stitches are on the inside. And I'm just going to start here at the bottom, and I'm going to go all the way around. When I get to the other point, I'm going to stitch this down like this. We like the point. The point looks good. So once you have this part like this, then you're just going to fold down the next side and keep going. So you can pin this whole section if you want, or you can just kind of finger press it. You could iron it down to keep it in place, and you could stitch it then, which would also be pretty easy. Whatever works for you. I'm going to finger press it as I go and just do a running stitch, and I will come back in a minute and show you what that looks like. Alright, so the hem is all set. You can see what that looks like here. That means this is the whole front of our hood. This is where the neck starts. So all that's left now is to turn over this edge at the head. So I'm going to do a running stitch hem just like I did at the bottom, all around here, and I think I'm going to put a couple of stitches on top, making like a little X right here at the bottom of the head hole, which will make it a little stronger and also look nice. So I'm going to get that started, and then we'll see what that looks like. A lot of times when these hoods are found, they have some decorative stitching on it. So I will show you a little bit of how to do some of that after I get this hood hem done. So I'm just going to start right here at sort of the bottom of the head hole under your chin. So I'm going to start right here, go all the way around, and then you'll see it again in a minute. Okay, so that hem around the neck edge is done. So that's all the steps. You've done everything for this. You have a hood. Everything is all nicely sewn and hemmed. It should fit almost anybody. Fits me. You can certainly make the pieces bigger if you need to fit someone larger. The last thing I did, just so you could see it, is I started to do what's called a blanket stitch or a buttonhole stitch, just around the neck opening too. You don't have to do that at all. It's just a decorative thing that sometimes we saw on them, so I will probably finish that around the neck here. You could also put trim on. You could do all sorts of things because it's your hood. If you want to do a buttonhole stitch, certainly you could look up how to do it. You start with the thread coming off the top, and then I'm going to put the needle through here next to it, and then I'll get all my thread in a big knot. But you see it's making a loop. It's trapped on that. And then if you don't tighten it too much, it will just make a nice little thing. I'm putting them pretty far apart just because I'm only doing it for the look. But it's not too tricky. So if it's something you want to add, you can. If you want to add some trim, you can. If you just want it to be totally done, it is. So you are all set. If you do make a hood, I would love to see a picture of it. Doesn't have to be on you. It could be on a table. It could be on a dog. It could be on whoever you made it for or yourself. But that would be great. And if you have any questions, let me know. And I hope you had a good time working on your hood. Thank you.